YouTube. I just wanted to go over my steel chart a little bit. It's changed over the years. I've been developing this over the last 4 or 5 years. More and more data points have come in. I've changed different things and where they're placed. So hopefully this chart is going to give you an idea of the kinds of steels that might be best suited for what you're doing. And I will answer the question, at least in my opinion, what's at least some of the better steels that I recommend. And so I hope this is useful and interesting to you. It's definitely geared towards the knife steel nerds of the world, but I think it might be interesting and educational to other folks too. So I hope you enjoy it. We're going to start off talking a little bit about edge retention, because that's what everybody seems to want to hang their hat on most of the time. So currently you're looking at the chart sorted by edge retention, and that seems to be the golden thing that people want to hang their hat on, is edge retention. So as you can see, of course, my claim to fame is the old Rex 121 up there. It is at the top of the edge retention chart. Maximet actually is notably lower, but still substantial. Then you move down to 15V and S125V. Now, the interesting thing with this is S125V is the highest edge retaining stainless steel. So if that's of interest to you in terms of stainless, that would be the next thing. I can tell you Rex 121 is not stainless. And so we'll talk about that a little bit next when we look at the toughness here. So now we're sorted by toughness, and this is probably one of the least understood attributes of steel, is toughness. There's technical definitions, and there's toughness is a specific rating, but then there's also strength, and there's a couple attributes that kind of all get thrown into toughness, even though toughness is a very specific rating. It's kind of an impact sort of rating, but generally speaking, as consumers, that gets rated all into that one place. Now, you'll see some of the highest edge retaining. If you look carefully, if you look at the blue line, it's almost inverse with some exceptions. But if you put a trend line in there, it is inverse with the edge holding. Edge holding and toughness are sort of opposites. And you see most of our super steels are highly alloyed, high edge retention steels here, all scored pretty low in the edge retention. I just note a couple things here for you to look at. You know, Rex 121 is one of the lowest because it's one of the highest alloyed steels. It is within 1% of not actually being classified as a steel, so it's pretty low on that chart. But honestly, is there a big difference here? Should you be batoning with any steels like this? Maybe you should ask, should you be batoning at all? But I mean, should you be batoning with any of these steels? Are any of these steels really suitable for that purpose? To which I would say no. You know, even moving up into here, is there a meaningful difference in toughness with these? Now you start to get up into here, yeah, now we're talking some more significant toughness. I would point out a couple interesting points here. One, look how high AEBL is on the toughness scale as a stainless. Higher than steels like 52-100. Well, yeah, a little higher than 52-100. Higher than some steels you would figure V-Toku 2. A lot of people think 01 and 1095 are super tough steels. A lot of manufacturers heat treat 1095 in such a way that favors toughness. You know, 1095 can be heat treated as high as 65 or better, Rockwell, and a lot of the manufacturers run it around 56 to 58. So they're tempering it way down to get more toughness out of it. But naturally speaking, it's not a necessarily tough steel. L6 is a common steel in bandsaw blades, 5160 was a common steel in leaf springs. Very tough, pretty low on the edge holding side of the equation, but pretty tough. So that's toughness, and basically resistance to edges rolling, resistance to edges chipping. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but it is an important attribute. And the long story short is, the better your toughness, the more aggressive edge geometry you can get away with. And we all know that edge geometry plays into ultimate performance at the end of the day. So toughness actually can affect edge retention, even though they would seem unrelated. Now moving on to corrosion resistance. Okay, when it comes to corrosion resistance, a lot of times people think about it in a binary sense. Either it's stainless or it's not stainless. And stainless is usually, most people would draw a stainless line probably between XHP and CPM S30V. Somewhere in here is where we'd arbitrarily say one is stainless, one is not. Some people who like to think they know a lot about steel will say, oh, well, if it has more than 14% chrome, then it's stainless. If it has more than 12% chrome, it's stainless. Well, no. The chrome content, knowing the chrome content isn't even 50% of the equation. Now, granted, if it only has 1% chrome content, you can assume it is not stainless. But stainlessness is the interplay between chrome and carbon. Nitrogen affects it. There's some other alloys. Niobium can affect it. So it's not that simple. But generally speaking, this is a fair, this is a pretty decent representation. This is the green line we're looking at of corrosion resistance. So these steels here, from super blue to L6, they're just not at all corrosion resistant. Is one a little more than the other? Does somebody want to argue with me like, oh, well, 52-100 should be there and 01 should be there? Stop it. It doesn't matter. They're not corrosion resistant. They're not going to be noticeably better or worse than one another. We start to move up into these steels here. You take a bump at A2 and 15V and 10V and M4 and Maximet. These are still not very corrosion resistant. I mean, you're going to rust pretty quick with these guys. Then we get into the D2s. Now, here's where some arguments might, D2 should be higher up on there. What's 3V doing all the way up there? Well, 3V has a lot less carbon than D2, and so there's more free chromium, amongst other things. But, so, here are these semi-stainless, the XHP. Again, XHP has a fair amount of chrome in it, but has a lot of carbon in it, too. It's actually a pretty nice steel. So these are stainless-ish. Now AEBL brings a lot to the table as a stainless, but it is not super corrosion resistant as a stainless. And then you move up here, like when you look at these in big chunks, I mean, these are not going to be dramatically different when they're only, a few points apart. When we start seeing an increase significantly, I mean, I'd say kind of around S45VN. There we see some of the effects of that nitrogen in there. You're going to see something common in these higher corrosion resistant steels is nitrogen. We got CPM S110V. You got CTS BD1N. Find that in some Spyderco products, lightweight Manix and whatnot. M390 and its brethren Vanix H1 LC200N. These three are in a particular order, but they're exactly the same rating, so I don't know if it just is alphabetical order at that point or whatnot. But these are all at 100, so they're not meaningfully different from one another. It's just where they happen to be placed. So as promised, I said I would tell you the best steel. So the ultimate best steel. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, we're looking at a chart that is sorted by edge retention, because that seems to be sort of the number one thing that people look at. But as we look across all these steels, the values are piled on top of each other. So we can see that some of these steels are bringing a lot more value to the table. And let's assume we have a cutoff on edge retention, that we need at least A2 edge retention, A2 or better as we move up the edge retention scale. Now, one interesting thing to notice is that the edge retention values are less dramatically different than the toughness values. And toughness is a little harder to see unless you're really working a knife hard or really pushing edge geometry. So we don't notice that as much. Some of us might notice corrosion resistance if we're in particular environments and don't care for our knives as carefully and whatnot. So, but as promised, we can kind of see sort of the aggregate values here. So if I was picking out my best steel with all things considered, mine would be LC200N. You can see that it's also at the top of everything. It's a reasonably priced steel. It's not cheap, but it's not off the charts like Vanix. Vanix is cool. Vanix might be my second choice if I needed stainless and wanted a little extra toughness. That might be a second choice. Honestly, CPM S45VN's looking pretty good these days. CTS XHP is not a bad choice either if you want, favor edge retention a little bit. But in terms of balance, M390 is great, good corrosion resistance, good edge retention, but you're giving up toughness. Now, on a small EDC knife, that toughness doesn't matter. Like, I have not run into issues with Rex 121, which is the least tough steel on this chart. One time I was removing carpet in a trailer and putting it in the corner and running across copper staples. I got a couple of microchips in the edge, but not bad. It's not like it's glass. It's not like it's, unusable. But, if I had to be a knife maker, as a knife maker, if somebody said, if you could only use one steel, what would it be? Well, there's not too many applications that LC200N could not do. I could put it in a chopper. I could put it in a chef's knife. I could put it in an EDC. I could put it in just about anything, and it's going to perform well. Some things could perform a little better than others, but that would be my choice. So here is my favorite steel, and this is just for me. Maybe your use case is different. Maybe you absolutely need the best absolute edge retention. You're not worried about these other things. So a lot of people, when they do these videos, will say something like, well, it all depends what you need. Well, that's absolutely true. But at the same time, I can step back and say, that steel will do everything that you need it to do and more. And there's no guessing work in it. Ironically enough, LC200N is not in too many knives. Spyderco has it in a few. Some custom makers use it, but it's hard to come by. The BD1N is sort of a runner-up. That's a little more of a budget version of that. I'll tell you another steel that I'm thinking of making as my baseline budget steel is, where are you? It's the steel that Kershaw actually uses in a lot. The Sandvik 14C28N. Fantastic steel. And it's a budget steel. It's a little trickier to get as custom makers. They only want to sell you like enough to make 10,000 knives. But you can find it here and there. That's a fantastic steel too. AEBL, I like AEBL a lot in like a bushcraft or something like that, where people traditionally use carbon steels, but it is not particularly corrosion resistant. It's probably, it's a little better than D2, but not a lot. So that's my conclusions on blade steels, and I just wanted to do an update on this chart because I hadn't done one for a while, and I hope it's helpful to you as you're looking at knives and cutting through the hype of marketing and try to get a sense of the ways that these steels do perform better. Again, this is assuming optimum heat treats, which is not always the case with every manufacturer. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.